Take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let me tell you a story.
The front door of the lake house was still open. A warm breeze drifted in from the water, carrying the scent of pine trees and fresh rain. Judy stood at the entrance, one hand still holding the pie box she had bought less than an hour earlier. She had driven almost 3 hours from Dallas with a smile on her face. For the first time in months, she had canceled meetings, ignored emails, turned off her work phone. She wanted one simple thing: to spend a quiet weekend with her husband. The pie was his favorite. Apple cinnamon, from a tiny bakery they used to visit when they were newly married. The owner still remembered them. "Tell your husband I said hello," the old woman had said while wrapping the pie. Judy had smiled. "I will." Now she wasn't sure she would ever walk into that bakery again, because she could hear laughter. A woman's laughter. Soft, comfortable, familiar. At first she frowned. Maybe John had invited friends over. Maybe a client was visiting. She took another step inside. Then she heard John's voice. Not his business voice. Not the voice he used during meetings. This one was lighter, warmer. A version of him she hadn't heard in a long time. Something inside her chest tightened. She walked toward the living room. Her heels clicked softly against the wooden floor. One step, then another. Then she stopped. The pie box slipped from her fingers. It hit the floor. The lid opened. The pie rolled onto the rug. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. John was sitting on the couch, and beside him sat another woman. The woman was wearing Judy's robe, her favorite cream-colored robe, the one John had bought for her during their anniversary trip to Colorado. For a second the room seemed to lose all sound. John's hand was still resting on the back of the couch. The woman slowly turned her head. Her expression changed from comfort to confusion. John looked like a man who had seen a ghost. His face lost its color. "Judy." Her eyes moved from him to the woman, then back to him. No anger, no tears, just silence. A painful kind of silence. John slowly stood up. "Judy, this isn't what it looks like." Even he sounded unconvinced. Because what else could it possibly look like? Another woman. His wife's robe. Their lake house. The same place where they had celebrated anniversaries. The same place where they had planned their future. The same place where he once promised he would love her until his last breath. The other woman opened her mouth as if she wanted to explain something. No words came out. Judy simply looked at them. 1, 2, 3 long seconds. Her eyes settled on the pie lying on the floor. A strange thing to notice during a moment like this. She had driven all that way to surprise her husband. She had even remembered the extra cinnamon, because he liked it that way. For a brief moment, she almost laughed. Life had a cruel sense of humor. John took a step toward her. "Please, let me explain." She finally looked at him again. The man she had loved for years. The man she had defended. The man she had built a life with. He looked terrified. But there was something else in his eyes. Guilt. Because some truths don't need explaining. They simply stand in front of you, breathing. Wearing your robe. John moved again. "Judy, please say something." She didn't. Not a single word. She bent down, picked up her car keys that had slipped from her hand, straightened her jacket. Then she turned around, then walked away. No screaming, no broken dishes, no insults, no tears, just the sound of her heels fading into the distance. John stood frozen. The woman beside him looked at him in disbelief. "Your wife," she whispered. He didn't answer, because for the first time in a very long time, John was afraid. Not of losing his money, not of losing his reputation. He was afraid of losing the one person who had stood beside him when he had nothing. Outside, Judy reached her car. She placed both hands on the steering wheel, but she didn't start the engine. She simply sat there, quiet, very quiet. The lake shimmered under the afternoon sun. A few ducks floated near the shore. The world looked exactly the same, yet everything had changed. A memory suddenly entered her mind. John laughing on this same property years ago. John promising her forever. John saying he could never betray her. She closed her eyes, took a slow breath, then another. A single tear slid down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, because something inside her had already made a decision that would change all three of their lives. But before we get there, I want to ask you something. If you walked into your home and found the person you loved with someone else, would you scream? Would you fight? Or would you walk away in silence the way Judy did? Because sometimes the quietest reaction hides the strongest person in the room. 1 week later, the lake house was empty. The pie stain had been cleaned from the rug. The wine glasses had been put away. The silence, however, remained. John stood in the kitchen, staring at his phone. He hadn't slept much in 7 days. Every morning, he expected Judy to call. Every night, he expected her to come home. Neither happened. At first, he convinced himself she simply needed time. Then the emails started arriving. The first one came from his financial advisor. He almost ignored it. Instead, he opened it. His eyebrows pulled together. A large investment account had been closed. He frowned. That couldn't be right. He called the advisor immediately. There's been some mistake. The man on the other end cleared his throat. No mistake, John. The account was never yours. What do you mean it wasn't mine? It was under your wife's trust. You were granted access years ago, but the ownership remained with her. John sat down slowly. That's impossible. I'm sorry. The call ended. He stared at the phone. Then another notification appeared. His luxury SUV had been removed from his company benefits account. A second email followed. Then a third. One by one, the things he had taken for granted began disappearing. The investment accounts, the vacation property, the executive membership at the country club, even the company shares he believed belonged to him. Gone. He opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. His hand shook as he searched through the documents. He couldn't understand it. How had he never noticed? Because he never asked. Judy had handled everything for years, not because she wanted control, because she trusted him, and because he trusted her. At least, he used to. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was the delivery driver. Package for John. John signed and closed the door. Inside was another envelope. Legal documents. He sat at the kitchen table and read every page. By the time he finished, his face had turned pale. Nothing had been stolen from him. Nothing had been taken unfairly. Everything belonged to Judy. She had simply stopped sharing it. The realization hit him harder than any argument could have. The life he enjoyed, the comfort, the luxury, the security. Much of it existed because his wife had quietly built an empire and invited him to enjoy it beside her. And now he was standing alone inside a house that suddenly felt too big. His phone rang. He jumped. For a moment he couldn't breathe. The screen lit up. Judy. He answered so quickly that he nearly dropped the phone. Judy. Silence. Then her voice came. Calm, steady, almost gentle. I didn't take anything that wasn't mine, John. He swallowed hard. Please. Can we talk? Another brief silence. Then she said something that made him sit up. I think you should meet the woman you destroyed your marriage for. His eyes closed. Judy, she continued, because she's been lying to herself too. He frowned. What does that mean? You'll understand soon. Judy, listen to me. I made a mistake. Her answer came quietly. No, John. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or burning dinner. She paused. What you did was a choice. He had no response. For the first time in years, he couldn't think of a single thing to say. Her voice softened. You know what's sad? He remained silent. I spent years protecting your pride. Those words hit him harder than anything else. Because they were true. When his business collapsed, she stayed. When people whispered that he had failed, she stood beside him. When he lost confidence in himself, she believed in him enough for both of them. And somehow, He had forgotten all of it. "I never wanted you to feel small," she said quietly. He lowered his head. "But somewhere along the way, you forgot who was standing beside you." A long silence followed. Finally he whispered, "I'm sorry." The words sounded weak, too late, too small. She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice carried something he had never heard before. Peace, not anger, not bitterness, peace. "I hope one day you forgive yourself, John." The line went quiet. Then the call ended. He stared at the phone. A strange feeling settled over him. Fear. Because he suddenly understood something. He might have already lost his marriage. And he might have lost it long before the lake house. He stood and walked toward the window. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. The same sky, the same house, the same world. Yet nothing felt familiar anymore. He had spent so much time feeling sorry for himself that he never noticed what Judy had sacrificed. Never noticed how often she defended him. Never noticed how carefully she protected his dignity. And now she was gone. A person doesn't always realize the value of love while they're receiving it. Sometimes they only understand after the silence arrives. And John had never heard silence this loud. So let me ask you something. If someone stood beside you during your worst days, believed in you when you didn't believe in yourself, would you protect that person? Or would you take their love for granted? Because before this story is over, one woman will lose her husband. Another woman will lose the future she thought she had. And one lesson will change both of their lives forever. Welcome back to Mr. Georges Stories, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. If you're new to this family, thank you for joining us. Please hit the subscribe button because it helps us share stories like this on YouTube. And before we continue, tell me in the comments, do you think Judy did the right thing by walking away in silence? Or should she have confronted them right there in the lake house? I read your comments, and I love hearing your thoughts. Now settle in, because the story of billionaire CEO Judy didn't begin with betrayal. It began with love, a kind of love that made everyone believe some marriages could survive anything. Sadly, not every promise lasts forever. Years before the silence inside that lake house, years before money, luxury homes, and magazine covers, Judy was just a little girl growing up in southern Dallas. The neighborhood wasn't rich. Nobody drove expensive cars. Most of the houses looked nearly the same. Small front yards, old wooden fences, children riding bicycles up and down the street until the streetlights came on. On summer evenings, the smell of barbecue floated through the neighborhood. People sat on their porches talking. Everyone knew everyone. If one family was struggling, somebody brought food. If somebody got sick, the entire neighborhood showed up. Judy grew up believing that community mattered. She also learned something else. Money could disappear. Character could not. That lesson came from the person she admired most, her grandmother. The older woman never had much money, but she carried herself with quiet dignity. She ironed her clothes carefully. Every Sunday before church, she kept her little house spotless. And every evening she sat with Judy on the front porch and talked about life. One evening, when Judy was about 10 years old, she asked a question. "Grandma, why do you work so hard if we're still not rich?" Her grandmother smiled. Because children ask questions adults are sometimes afraid to ask. She folded her hands and looked down the street. "Being rich isn't the most important thing." Judy frowned. "It isn't?" "No." "What is?" Her grandmother looked at her. "The kind of person you become." Judy thought about that. "But money helps." "It does." "Then why isn't it the most important thing?" The older woman smiled again. "Because money can leave." She pointed toward the houses nearby. People lose jobs. Businesses fail. Things change. Then she gently tapped Judy's chest. "But this right here, your heart, your values, your character, those things stay." The little girl became quiet. Her grandmother continued, "If you become successful one day, never let money change the way you treat people. That sentence stayed with Judy for years. She remembered it in school. She remembered it in college. And she would remember it again on the worst day of her marriage. As she grew older, one thing became obvious. Judy loved buildings. She loved drawing. She loved looking at houses and imagining how they could be improved. Whenever her classmates played outside, she often sat at the kitchen table with pencils and paper. She designed bedrooms, living rooms, entire houses. Her grandmother once looked over her shoulder. "What are you making now?" Judy smiled. "A dream house?" The older woman laughed. "You've drawn 10 dream houses this month." "I'm practicing." "For what?" Judy looked up. "Because one day I want to build beautiful homes." "That sounds expensive." "It probably is." Her grandmother chuckled. "Well, if anybody can do it, it's you." Those words became fuel. Judy worked hard in school, very hard. While other students worried only about weekends, she worried about grades and scholarships. She knew her family couldn't pay for expensive colleges. If she wanted a different future, she had to earn it. And she did. By the time she entered college to study architecture, she already had a reputation. Disciplined, focused, determined. But college wasn't easy. There were days she felt exhausted. Days she wondered if she was pushing herself too hard. She worked 2 jobs, one during the day, another at night. There were evenings when she returned home so tired that she could barely remove her shoes. Yet she kept going, because every difficult day reminded her of where she came from. She wasn't chasing money. She was chasing possibility. She wanted to create something meaningful, something that would last. One afternoon, after finishing classes, she sat alone at a coffee shop. Papers and design sketches covered the table. A classmate walked by and laughed softly. "Do you ever rest?" Judy smiled. "Eventually." "When?" "When my dreams stop being expensive." The other student laughed and shook his head. But Judy wasn't joking. Every dollar mattered. Every opportunity mattered. Years passed. Eventually, she graduated. Not at the top of her class, but close enough that several companies wanted to hire her. She thanked them, then shocked almost everyone. She decided to start her own business. People thought she was taking a huge risk. Maybe she was. She rented a tiny office. The furniture didn't match. The air conditioner worked only when it wanted to, and she couldn't afford employees. So she became everything. Designer, receptionist, accountant, marketing department, cleaner. Some nights she slept on the office couch. Other nights she stayed awake worrying about bills. But she never quit. Slowly, little by little, clients started coming. Then more clients. One recommendation became another. A small project became a larger one. For the first time, she felt her dream taking shape. One evening, she locked the office door and stood outside smiling. The business wasn't making much money yet, but it was alive. She had built something with her own hands, and she was proud of it. What Judy didn't know was that her life was about to change in a completely different way. Because on an ordinary afternoon, she would meet a man named John, a man who would become her greatest love, and eventually her greatest heartbreak. But on that day, she knew none of that. She only knew she had a meeting with a construction company, and she was running 5 minutes late. Judy hated being late. As she hurried across the parking lot, she looked at her watch for the 3rd time in less than a minute. 5 minutes. That was all. Still, it bothered her. The meeting mattered. Her young design business had finally attracted the attention of a construction company that wanted to discuss a possible partnership. She had spent half the night preparing drawings and ideas. Now she was walking into the meeting carrying a folder under one arm and a cup of coffee in the other. She pushed open the glass door. The receptionist looked up. "Good afternoon. I'm here for the meeting with the owner." The woman smiled. "He's expecting you." A moment later, Judy heard footsteps. She turned, and there he was, John. He wasn't wearing a suit. Instead, he had on dark jeans and a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked more like a man who spent time building things than sitting behind a desk. He stopped when he saw her. "You must be Judy." She nodded. "And you must be the owner." A grin appeared on his face. "I like you already." She blinked. "Because I guessed correctly?" "No, because you walked in looking like you own the place." That made her laugh. "I assure you, I don't. Give it time." She wasn't sure why, but those words made her smile. He extended his hand. "I'm John." She shook it. "Nice to meet you." For some reason, neither of them let go immediately. Then both of them seemed to realize it at the same time, and quickly pulled away. An awkward second passed. John cleared his throat. "Come on, let's talk." They walked into his office. It was simple. A large desk, a few framed photographs, building plans spread across a side table. Nothing fancy, but everything looked organized. He noticed her studying the room. "What? You actually work in here?" He laughed. "Should I be offended?" "No, I expected a huge office." "Sorry to disappoint you." "You didn't." He pulled out a chair for her. She sat down. The meeting began. At first it was business, construction plans, design ideas, potential projects. But within 20 minutes it felt less like a meeting and more like a conversation. John asked questions. Real questions. Not the kind people ask while waiting for their turn to speak. He listened carefully. When she described her vision for luxury homes, he paid attention. When she talked about creating spaces that felt warm and personal, he leaned forward. "You really love this, don't you?" She smiled. "I do. I can tell." She looked down at her drawings. "Most people think I'm crazy." "Why?" "Because I started my own company instead of taking a secure job." He leaned back. "I don't think that's crazy." "No? I think it's brave." The room became quiet. Nobody had ever described her that way. Determined, hardworking, ambitious. She had heard all those words. Brave? Never. John pointed at one of her sketches. "This one is my favorite." She looked surprised. "You can actually read these plans?" He laughed. "I own a construction company." "Right. You forgot already?" "No. I was just making sure." He smiled again. The conversation lasted much longer than either of them expected. Eventually, John glanced at the clock. "Well," Judy looked up. "Well, what?" "We've been talking for almost 2 hours." She blinked. "No, we haven't." He turned the clock toward her. Her eyes widened. "Oh, my goodness." He laughed. "You really didn't notice." She gathered her papers. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to take up your afternoon." "You didn't?" "I definitely did." He stood. "And I definitely don't mind." They walked toward the door. At the reception desk, she turned toward him. "Thank you for meeting with me." "Thank you for making my afternoon interesting." She smiled. Then she started walking away. "Judy." She stopped and looked back. "Yes?" "I know this is going to sound strange." "That's an interesting way to begin a sentence." He laughed. "Would you like to get dinner sometime?" She blinked. "Oh, see? I knew it sounded strange." "No, I just wasn't expecting that." "Neither was I." That made her laugh. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Listen, if the answer is no, that's okay." She studied him for a second. There was something honest about him. No arrogance. No games. Just a man asking a simple question. "When?" His eyebrows lifted. "Is that a yes?" She smiled. "When?" A slow grin spread across his face. "Friday? I can do Friday." "Great. Great." For some reason, both of them kept smiling. Then she finally turned and walked outside. The entire drive home, she couldn't stop thinking about him. Not because he owned a company, not because he had asked her to dinner, because he listened. He looked at her as though her dreams mattered. That feeling stayed with her. Friday arrived. Then dinner. Then another dinner. Then coffee. then a walk through a downtown market. Their conversations seemed endless. They talked about everything: family, dreams, favorite movies, things they regretted, things they still hoped to accomplish. One evening they sat outside a small restaurant long after they had finished eating. The waiter had already cleaned the nearby tables. Still, neither of them wanted to leave. John looked at her. "What? You think about everything before you answer." She laughed. "Is that a bad thing?" "No." "Then why are you staring at me?" "I'm trying to figure you out." "Good luck." He smiled. "You're difficult." "No, I'm careful." "What's the difference?" She thought for a second. "One gives up. The other pays attention." He nodded slowly. "That's a good answer." She smiled. "What about you?" "What about me?" "What are you careful about?" He looked away briefly, then back at her. "The people I let into my life." The answer surprised her. For the first time that evening, neither of them spoke. Something had shifted. The air between them felt different, warmer, softer. Finally, John smiled. "You know what?" "What?" "I don't think one dinner is enough." She laughed. "No?" "No. How many do you need?" He pretended to think. "At least 20? She laughed again. "That's a lot of dinners." "I'm a patient man." She shook her head. He looked at her carefully. "How about this instead?" She waited. "Take a drive with me this weekend." "A drive?" "Yes." "Where?" He smiled. "That's the fun part." "You don't know?" "Oh, I know." "Then tell me." "No." She laughed. "Why not?" "Because road trips are better when there's a little mystery." She looked at him. He looked back at her. Then he smiled again. "So, what do you say?" Judy crossed her arms. "You ask a lot of unexpected questions." "I know. And if I say no, I'll ask again another day." She laughed softly. There it was again. That confidence. Not arrogant. Not pushy. Just certain. Certain that good things were worth pursuing. For some reason, she liked that. Very much. She smiled. "Maybe." He grinned. "I'll take maybe." Little did either of them know that one simple road trip would become the beginning of a love story that people would admire for years. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and a gentle Texas breeze. Judy stood by her apartment window, coffee mug in hand, wondering why she was nervous. It was only a drive. At least, that was what she kept telling herself. Still, she had changed outfits twice. By the time she heard a car pull into the parking lot, she was laughing at herself. A moment later, there was a knock. She opened the door. John stood there, wearing a relaxed smile. "You look nice," she smiled. "So do you." He glanced at his watch. "Good. We're right on schedule." "We?" "Mostly me." She laughed. "I should have guessed." He held out a hand toward the parking lot. "Ready?" She locked the door. "I still don't know where we're going." "That's because I haven't told you. You enjoy keeping secrets." "Only harmless ones." She looked at him suspiciously. "We'll see." A few minutes later, they were driving south. The windows were down. Music played softly through the speakers. For a while, neither of them said much. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt easy, like they didn't need to fill every second with words. Eventually, Judy looked at him. "Are you going to tell me where we're going?" "No." "Still?" "Still." She shook her head. "You're impossible." He grinned. "I've been called worse." "By who?" "My sister." She laughed. "That doesn't count." "It definitely counts." The road stretched ahead of them. Fields and open land passed by. Small towns appeared and disappeared. The farther they drove, the more relaxed Judy became. She rested her arm against the window and smiled. John noticed. "You're finally enjoying yourself." "I never said I wasn't." "You were suspicious." "I still am." "Fair enough." About an hour later, he pulled into a small town. She looked around. A few local stores lined the street. There was a bakery on one corner and a small diner nearby. This is our destination. No. Then why are we here? Because I'm hungry. She laughed. You drove all this way for breakfast? Absolutely. She shook her head. You really are impossible. He smiled. And yet you're still here. She couldn't argue with that. Inside the diner, they ordered pancakes and coffee. The place was small and quiet. An older couple sat by the window. A family occupied another table. Everything felt simple, comfortable. John looked at her. What? I've never seen you relaxed. You've known me for 2 weeks. Exactly. She laughed. That's hardly enough time. Maybe. He stirred his coffee. Still, you always look like you're thinking about work. She looked down at her cup. I probably am. Why? She considered the question, because she wasn't entirely sure herself. Finally, she said, I spent so much time trying to build my business that slowing down feels strange. He nodded. I understand that. Do you? More than you think. She looked at him carefully. He continued. When I started my company, I worked almost every day. Really? I missed birthdays, family dinners, holidays. That sounds lonely. He smiled slightly. It was, for a moment. Neither of them spoke. Then Judy asked softly, was it worth it? He thought about it. Some of it was. And the rest? The rest taught me that success doesn't mean much if you have nobody to share it with. She looked at him. Really looked at him. He wasn't just confident. There was depth there, experience, a few old disappointments. She liked that he didn't pretend to have everything figured out. They left the diner and continued driving. A little later, they arrived at a quiet lake. The water shimmered under the afternoon sun. Judy smiled. This is beautiful. I thought you'd like it. You've been here before? A few times. She walked toward the water. The breeze moved her hair. John joined her. For a while, they simply stood there. Then he asked, Can I ask you something? Sure. What do you really want? She frowned. That's a big question. I know. She looked out across the lake. What do I really want? She repeated the words softly. Then she smiled. I want to build homes that make people feel safe. He turned toward her. Safe? She nodded. When I was growing up, I realized that not everyone has a place that truly feels like home. She paused. I want to create spaces where people can laugh together, raise children, grow old together. He listened carefully. She continued. I know it sounds strange. It doesn't. I think homes hold memories. They do. And I want to build places where good memories happen. John smiled. You've thought about this a lot. I've thought about it my entire life. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said quietly, That's one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. A warm feeling spread through her chest. Nobody had ever described her dream that way. Most people talked about money, profit, success. John had listened to the heart behind her dream. That mattered more than she expected. They spent the rest of the afternoon walking by the water, talking, laughing, sharing stories. By the time the sun began setting, Judy realized something. She didn't want the day to end. The thought surprised her. As they drove back toward Dallas, the sky turned shades of orange and pink. Music played softly again. This time, she was the one who broke the silence. Can I ask you something? Of course. What do you want? He smiled, turning my question around on me. Maybe. He thought for a moment. I want a family. The answer came so quickly that she blinked. A family? He nodded. A home filled with noise. She laughed. Noise? Kids running through the house. You've really thought about this. I have. He glanced at her. I think life moves too fast sometimes. She remained quiet. I want someone to build a life with. The words hung in the air. Neither of them looked at each other, yet somehow the meaning settled gently between them. After a few moments he smiled. What? You look nervous. I am not nervous. You definitely are. She laughed. So are you. He smiled. Maybe a little. They both laughed. Then silence returned. But it felt different now. Softer, warmer, comfortable. As the lights of Dallas came into view, Judy realized something that frightened her slightly. She trusted him more than she should after such a short time, and she was beginning to look forward to seeing him again. Very much. John pulled into her apartment parking lot. Neither of them moved. Neither of them seemed in a hurry to say goodbye. Finally, she smiled. Thank you. For what? For the mystery road trip. He laughed. You're welcome. She opened the door, then paused. I had a good time. His smile widened. So did I. She stepped out, then leaned back toward the open window. Good night, John. Good night, Judy. She started walking away, then heard him call her name. She turned around. He rested his arm on the window. I have another question. She laughed. Of course you do. He smiled. Would it be too soon to ask you to dinner again? She couldn't stop herself from smiling. Probably. His expression became playful. So that's a no? She shook her head. No. That's a yes. He grinned. As she walked toward her apartment, she couldn't stop smiling. And inside his car, John couldn't stop smiling either. Neither of them knew it yet. But that drive through Texas had changed something. It had turned two strangers into something more, something important. And before long, they would become the kind of couple people admired, the kind of love story that made others believe in forever. Marriage looked good on Judy and John. They worked hard. They laughed often. And during those early years, they felt like a team. They bought a small house on the edge of Dallas. Nothing luxurious. A modest place with a tiny backyard and a porch that creaked whenever someone stepped on it. Judy loved it immediately. John did too. They spent weekends painting walls and assembling furniture. Some nights they ate dinner sitting on the floor because they hadn't purchased a dining table yet. Other nights, they stayed awake talking about the future. One evening, Judy sat on the kitchen counter eating takeout while John looked over some paperwork. She noticed the serious expression on his face. What is it? He looked up. Nothing. She narrowed her eyes. That doesn't look like nothing. He smiled. You know me too well. She slid off the counter and walked over. Talk to me. He sighed. The company is growing quickly. That's good. It is. But he rubbed his forehead. I've been thinking about expanding. She listened quietly. New equipment, bigger projects, more employees. She nodded. You've wanted this for a long time. I know. So why don't you sound excited? He looked at the papers again. Because growth costs money. Judy leaned against the desk. You'll figure it out. He smiled. You always believe that. Because you always do. He reached for her hand. I don't know what I'd do without you. She squeezed his fingers. Hopefully, you'll never have to find out. At the time, neither of them realized how important those words would become. Months passed. John expanded his business. The first few projects went well. Then he accepted a larger investment opportunity. A risky one. People warned him. Some said he was moving too fast. Others advised him to wait. But John believed in himself. And for a while it looked like he had made the right decision. Then everything changed. One project fell behind schedule. Another client backed out. Costs increased. Deadlines slipped. The numbers stopped making sense. One evening, John came home later than usual. Judy was sitting at the dining table, reviewing design sketches. She looked up. You're late? He didn't answer. She immediately put down her pencil. John? He slowly sat down. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he looked at her. I think I made a mistake. The words were so unlike him that her stomach tightened. What happened? He exhaled slowly. The investment. It's not working. She waited. He continued. We've lost money. How much? He named the amount. Her eyes widened. Neither of them spoke. Finally, she asked softly, "Can it be fixed?" He didn't answer right away, and that silence said everything. The weeks that followed became some of the hardest of their marriage. Bills piled up. Contracts disappeared. Employees left. Every day seemed to bring another problem. John stopped sleeping well. He barely ate. The confident man Judy had fallen in love with began looking exhausted. One night she found him sitting alone in the backyard. The porch light illuminated his face. He looked tired, older somehow. She sat beside him. He didn't say anything. After a while, she leaned her head against his shoulder. Still nothing. Finally, he whispered, "I failed." She lifted her head. "No." He laughed softly. "You don't have to protect my feelings." "I'm not." He looked at her. "My company is falling apart." She held his gaze. "You are not your company." He looked away. "I should have listened. Maybe. I should have been more careful. Maybe." He swallowed hard. "I let everybody down." She turned toward him. "No, you didn't." "Judy, no." Her voice was gentle, but firm. "You took a chance. And I lost." She nodded. "That happens sometimes." He looked at her as though he didn't understand. She continued, "You are still the same man who worked hard to build something." He shook his head. "I don't feel like that man anymore." Her heart broke a little hearing those words. She reached for his hand. "Then we'll help him find his way back." He looked at her. "We?" She smiled softly. "That's how marriage works." For the first time that evening, his eyes became glossy. He quickly looked away. She pretended not to notice, because sometimes love means protecting another person's dignity. The months ahead were difficult, very difficult. Their savings shrank. Expenses had to be cut. Vacations disappeared. Fancy dinners disappeared. Plans were postponed. Still, Judy never complained. She simply adjusted. She worked longer hours, took on additional projects, accepted more clients. Whenever John apologized, she always gave the same answer: "We're going to be okay." At church, people whispered. Some expected her to leave. Others wondered how long she would stay. A few even asked her directly. One afternoon, after a service, someone approached her. "You know, you don't have to carry this burden." Judy frowned. "What burden?" The woman looked uncomfortable. "Your husband's problems." Judy's expression changed. "My husband isn't a burden." "That's not what I meant." "I know exactly what you meant." The conversation ended quickly. As she walked to her car, she found John waiting. "You okay?" She smiled. "I'm fine." He studied her face. "You don't look fine." She laughed softly. "I promise I'm okay." But that evening, she couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. People really expected her to leave, as though love only mattered during good times. When she walked into the living room, she found John asleep on the couch. Documents were scattered around him. She covered him with a blanket. Then she sat nearby, looking at him, thinking this man had loved her through long work days, encouraged her dreams, believed in her business. Now he needed her, and she wasn't going anywhere. The next morning, she woke before sunrise. She made breakfast. Then she sat across from him. He looked tired. She smiled. "We need to talk." He looked worried immediately. "About what?" She reached into her bag and placed several papers on the table. He frowned. "What are these?" "Financial statements." He looked confused. "For my company." He slowly looked up. "Judy, we're going to get through this." He stared at her. "You want to help me?" She almost laughed. "Of course I do." "No, I mean financially." She nodded. He looked stunned. "I can't ask you to do that." "You didn't." "I can't take your money." "Our money." "Judy." "Our money." He looked down at the papers, then back at her. His eyes filled again. She reached across the table and held his hand. "We're A team. For several seconds, he couldn't speak. Finally, he whispered, "I don't deserve you." She smiled gently. "Then spend the rest of your life proving me wrong." He laughed through the emotion, but something changed inside him that morning. A small feeling. A quiet one. He hated needing help, especially from the woman he loved. And although he would never admit it, a tiny seed of inadequacy had just been planted. One that would continue growing in the years ahead. The year after John's business collapsed became one of the busiest years of Judy's life. At first she didn't notice the changes. She was too focused on keeping everything together. She worked longer hours, accepted projects she would have turned down in the past, spent evenings reviewing blueprints, and mornings meeting clients. She wasn't chasing fame. She was trying to protect her family. Ironically, that was exactly when success finally came knocking. One of her luxury home projects gained attention across Dallas. A client recommended her company to another client, then another, and another. Within months, Judy's small design firm had more work than it had ever seen. She hired employees, rented a larger office, added new designers. The little business she had built from a tiny office was becoming something much bigger. One afternoon, she walked into the kitchen, carrying several folders. John looked up from the couch. "You look happy." She laughed. "I am." "What happened?" She sat beside him. "We got another contract." "That's great." "And another one this morning." He smiled. "See? I told you people would notice your talent." She looked at him warmly. "You've always believed in me, because I know how hard you've worked." She leaned against him. For a while they sat there quietly. Then she said, "I wish things were easier for you right now." He kissed the top of her head. "Don't do that." "What?" "Feel guilty for succeeding." "I'm not guilty." "Good." She looked at him. "You mean that?" "Of course I do." And he did mean it, at least in that moment, because love can be sincere even when insecurity is slowly taking root. Months passed. The company continued growing. Then something happened that neither of them expected. A local business magazine featured one of Judy's home designs. The article praised her creativity and vision. She almost didn't believe it. When the magazine arrived, she carried it into the living room. "Look." John took it. His face lit up. "Judy?" She laughed. "I know." He stood and pulled her into a hug. "I'm so proud of you." She smiled against his shoulder. "You really are?" He stepped back. "Why wouldn't I be?" She shrugged. "I don't know." He held the magazine up. "My wife is in a magazine." She laughed again. "I think you're more excited than I am." "I definitely am." That night, they ordered takeout and celebrated. For a little while, everything felt normal again. But success kept coming. The magazine article led to more opportunities, more interviews, bigger clients, luxury projects across Texas. The company expanded again, then again. Eventually, Judy found herself attending events she had only read about years earlier. Business dinners, industry conferences, award ceremonies. One evening, she stood in front of a mirror, adjusting her dress. John came downstairs and stopped. "You look beautiful." She smiled. "Thank you." He walked closer. "You're nervous." "A little." "You'll be fine." She laughed softly. "I still can't believe they invited me." "You deserve it." She looked at him. "Come with me." He hesitated. "You should go." "I don't want to go alone." He smiled. "You won't be alone. You'll know everybody there." She reached for his hand. "I'd still rather have you with me." For a second, he looked tempted. Then he shook his head. "I have a few things to finish." She studied him. "Are you sure?" "Positive." She kissed his cheek. "I won't stay long." He smiled. "Enjoy yourself." After she left, the house became quiet. John sat alone in the living room. Eventually, he turned on the television, then turned it off. He looked at the empty chair across from him. The silence felt heavy. Later that evening, his phone buzzed. A message from Judy. Won an award. Call me when you're awake. Even through the screen, he could feel her excitement. He smiled. Then something unexpected happened. A strange feeling settled inside him. Not anger, not jealousy. Something more complicated. Because once upon a time, he had been the one attending events, the one shaking hands, the one making plans. Now he was sitting alone while his wife accepted awards. He hated himself for thinking that way, because she deserved every bit of her success. Still, the feeling remained. When Judy came home, she found him asleep on the couch. She smiled. Then she noticed the television wasn't on. The room was dark. She sat beside him and gently touched his arm. He opened his eyes. You waited up? He smiled. I tried. She held up the award. His face brightened. There it is. She laughed. There it is. He hugged her. I'm proud of you. She closed her eyes. Those words always meant something coming from him. Very softly, she whispered, Thank you. As the months passed, life became busier. The company expanded into larger projects. The couple moved into a beautiful new home. Then another upgrade followed years later, as the business continued growing. More responsibilities came with success. More employees, more meetings, more travel. Sometimes Judy left before sunrise. Sometimes she came home after dark. She hated it. She missed the simple days, missed dinners together, missed sitting on the porch talking about nothing. One evening, she walked into the house carrying her laptop. John was in the kitchen. You ate already? He nodded. I'm sorry. It's okay. No, it isn't. He smiled. Judy, it's fine. She walked over and hugged him. I miss you. He wrapped his arms around her. I know. She pulled away. We should take a trip. A trip? Just the two of us. He smiled. I'd like that, but the trip never happened. A client emergency came up. Then another. Then another. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And slowly something changed. John stopped talking as much. At first Judy thought he was tired. Then she thought he might be worried about work. Eventually, she noticed a pattern. He no longer wanted to attend events. He declined invitations, spent more time by himself, stayed in the backyard for long periods, or sat in his office with the door closed. One night she found him there. You've been in here for hours. He looked up. Have the first? She smiled. Are you okay? I'm fine. You sure? Yes. She nodded slowly. Something felt different, but she couldn't quite explain it. As the weeks passed, the distance between them grew a little more. Very little. So little that she barely noticed. Yet it was there. One evening, she suggested dinner. He said he wasn't hungry. Another evening, she suggested a movie. He said he was tired. Another night, she wanted to sit outside and talk. He said maybe tomorrow. Tomorrow came. Then another tomorrow. Then another. And somehow, they kept missing each other. One afternoon, Judy came home earlier than usual. She found John quickly putting his phone away. She smiled. Who are you hiding from? He looked surprised. No one. She laughed. You looked guilty. I was checking emails. Work emails? He nodded. She kissed his cheek. Okay. But after she walked away, he sat there for a long time, looking at the phone in his hand. Then he locked the screen. A few days later, it happened again, and then again. Little things, small moments, easy to overlook, except they kept happening. For the first time in their marriage, John had begun keeping pieces of his life to himself. And although Judy didn't know it yet, those small secrets were about to become much bigger ones. The changes between Judy and John didn't happen all at once. That was what made them dangerous. If there had been one big argument or one dramatic event, they probably would have stopped and fixed it. Instead, the distance arrived quietly. A missed dinner here, a canceled date there, a conversation postponed until tomorrow. And somehow tomorrow kept moving farther away. One Friday evening, Judy arrived home carrying 2 takeout bags. She had left the office early. For once, she planned to spend the entire night with her husband. She walked into the kitchen smiling. "Guess what I brought?" No answer. She set the bags on the counter. "John?" Still nothing. She walked into the living room. Empty. Then she heard a voice from upstairs. "I'm in here." She smiled and headed toward his office. When she opened the door, she found him sitting behind his desk. A laptop was open in front of him. Several papers were scattered across the desk. He looked up. "Oh, you're home." She held up the bags. "I brought dinner." He smiled politely. "That was nice of you." She frowned. "Why do you sound surprised?" "I didn't know you'd be home this early. I wanted to spend time together." His smile faded slightly. "I still need to finish a few things." She looked at the papers. "Can it wait?" He hesitated. "Probably not." She stood there for another second. Then she forced a smile. "Okay." He looked guilty. "I'll be down soon." She nodded and walked away. The food grew cold on the table. An hour passed. Then another. Finally, she put everything into containers and placed them in the refrigerator. When John came downstairs, she was already sitting on the couch. He looked at the clock. "Oh no." She smiled softly. "It's okay." "No, it isn't." He walked over. "I'm sorry." "It's fine." But it wasn't. And both of them knew it. He sat beside her. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Then she leaned her head against his shoulder. "I miss you." He closed his eyes. The words hurt, because he missed her too. He simply didn't know how to say it anymore. The next few months followed the same pattern. Their schedules no longer matched. Judy became busier than ever. John became quieter than ever. They still loved each other. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that they had stopped sharing the small moments that once made them feel close. One evening, Judy came home and found John sitting on the back porch. A glass of iced tea rested beside him. He was staring into the distance. She sat down. "You've been out here a while." He nodded. "You okay?" "I'm fine." She smiled softly. "You've said that a lot lately." He looked at her. "So have you." That made her laugh. "I guess we're both pretending." For a second he almost smiled. Then the expression disappeared. She reached for his hand. "I've been thinking." "About what?" "We need time together." He looked down. "We spend time together." "No." She shook her head gently. "We live in the same house." "That's not the same thing." He didn't answer. She squeezed his hand. "I miss my husband." The words settled between them. A long silence followed. Finally, he whispered, "I don't know what happened." She looked at him. "Neither do I." The truth was much more complicated. John knew exactly what had happened. He simply didn't know how to explain it, because every time he looked at Judy, he saw everything she had accomplished. The thriving company, the beautiful homes she designed, the respect she had earned. And every time he looked at himself, he remembered everything he had lost. The comparison wasn't fair. Judy had never judged him. Not once. She never made him feel less important. The battle was happening entirely inside him. One afternoon, he stopped by a hardware store to pick up supplies for a small consulting project. As he waited in line, he overheard 2 men talking. "That's Judy's husband." The other man glanced over. "The designer?" "Yeah, she's doing really well." The second man nodded. "I've seen her on television." Then he lowered his voice. "What does her husband do now?" The first man shrugged. "I don't know." The words weren't cruel, but they still hurt, because once upon a time, people had known exactly who he was. Now he was being introduced as someone else's husband. He left the store, carrying his supplies. The drive home felt longer than usual. That night he barely spoke during dinner. Judy noticed. She always noticed. "You seem tired." "I'm okay." "Long day?" He nodded. She studied him, then changed the subject, because she could tell he didn't want to talk. That was another thing that had changed. He no longer shared his burdens with her. Instead, He carried everything alone. And loneliness has a strange way of making people vulnerable. A few weeks later, John stopped at a coffee shop after a meeting. The place was quiet. He ordered coffee and found a table near the window. As he sat down, he noticed a woman sitting alone nearby. She looked frustrated. Her laptop was open. Several papers were spread across the table. She sighed and rubbed her forehead. Without thinking, John smiled. "One of those days?" She looked up. A small laugh escaped her. "You have no idea." He lifted his coffee. "I've had a few of those." She smiled politely, then returned to her papers. A few minutes later, one of the papers slipped from her table and landed near his chair. He picked it up. "I think this belongs to you." She laughed softly. "Thank you." "No problem." She looked exhausted. He noticed. "Tough day?" She sighed. "I'm trying to finish an application." "For school?" She nodded. "I'm hoping to improve my career." "That's a good thing." "I hope so." She looked at the paperwork again. "Some days, I wonder if I'm starting too late." He smiled. "It's never too late." She looked at him. "You really believe that?" "I do." For the first time, she smiled fully. "I'm Lillian." He hesitated only a second. "I'm John." They shook hands. Then silence settled between them. A comfortable kind of silence. Finally she asked, "What do you do?" The question caught him off guard, because he wasn't entirely sure how to answer anymore. After a brief pause, he said, "I used to own a construction company." Her expression softened. "Used to?" He nodded. "Life changes." She smiled sadly. "I understand that." Something about the way she said it made him curious. "You've had a few changes too?" She laughed softly. "That's one way to put it." He noticed the tired look in her eyes, the uncertainty, the feeling of trying to rebuild something. It looked familiar, because he had seen that same look in the mirror. For another 20 minutes they talked. Nothing important, just small things. Work, life, goals. Yet when he finally stood to leave, something felt different. For the first time in a long while, someone had spoken to him without knowing his history, without knowing his failures, without comparing him to anyone. She simply saw him. As he prepared to leave, Lillian smiled. "It was nice talking to you." He smiled back. "It really was." He walked toward the door, then paused. For reasons he couldn't explain, he turned around. She was watching him, still smiling. And in that moment, neither of them realized that a simple conversation over coffee had just changed the direction of 3 lives forever. After their first conversation at the coffee shop, John didn't expect to see Lillian again. He certainly didn't plan on thinking about her. Yet a few days later, he found himself stopping by the same place. At first, he told himself it was because the coffee was good. The truth was more complicated. Part of him wanted another easy conversation, one without pressure, one without expectations. As he walked inside, he saw her immediately. She was sitting at the same table. Her laptop was open again. Several papers were spread around her. This time she looked less frustrated. When she noticed him, she smiled. "Well, look who's back." He laughed softly. "I was hoping they'd still let me in." "They're very forgiving here." He ordered coffee and walked toward her table. "Mind if I sit?" She gestured toward the empty chair. "Please." For the next hour, they talked. Nothing serious. Books, movies, favorite foods. The kinds of conversations people have when they know almost nothing about each other. And somehow, that was what made it easy. There was no history between them. No disappointments. No expectations. Just 2 people talking. When he finally stood to leave, Lillian smiled. "See you around?" He hesitated, then smiled back. "Probably." He should have left it there. Instead, he returned again. And again. The meetings became regular. Sometimes they stayed only 20 minutes. Sometimes an hour. The conversations slowly became more personal. One afternoon, Lillian looked at him carefully. "You don't talk about yourself much." He laughed. "Maybe I'm mysterious." "No." She smiled. "I think you're carrying something." He looked down at his coffee. She wasn't wrong. Everyone carries something. Eventually, she asked quietly, "Are you married?" The question caught him off guard. He looked at the wedding ring on his finger. For a second, he almost said everything. That he had a wife who had stood beside him through difficult times. That he still loved her. That his marriage wasn't broken. It was simply tired. Instead, he gave a different answer. "It's complicated." Lillian nodded slowly. "Those are usually the most difficult situations." He laughed softly. "You sound experienced." She smiled sadly. "I've seen enough disappointment." A silence followed. Then she asked, "Are you happy?" The question stayed in the air. He should have said yes. Instead, he answered honestly, "I don't know." She looked surprised. He rubbed his hands together. "My wife and I barely see each other anymore." That part was true. We live in the same house, but sometimes it feels like we're living separate lives. That was true too. Lillian listened quietly. He continued, "Things changed." "How?" He stared out the window. "I guess we became different people." It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. Lillian's expression softened. "That sounds lonely." He looked at her. "Sometimes it is." The conversation moved on. Yet something had shifted. A door had opened. And once certain doors open, it becomes easier to keep walking through them. Over the next few weeks, John shared more. Little pieces at first, then larger ones. He talked about his failed business, the pressure, the embarrassment, the feeling of no longer recognizing himself. Lillian listened, never judging, never interrupting. One afternoon she asked, "Does your wife understand how you feel?" He hesitated. Then came the first real lie. "I don't think she sees me anymore." The words surprised even him, because they weren't true. Judy saw him. She always had. The problem was that he no longer saw himself. Still, once he said it aloud, it became easier to believe. Lillian looked saddened. "I'm sorry." He nodded. "It's okay." No, it wasn't. But he didn't correct himself. Days later, another conversation led to another lie. "Does she still love you?" He looked away. "I don't know." That wasn't true either. Deep down, he knew exactly how much Judy loved him. She had spent years proving it. Yet in that coffee shop, he allowed a different story to form. One where he was neglected. One where he was forgotten. One where he was the lonely husband no one understood. The lies didn't begin because he wanted to hurt Judy. They began because they made him feel better, made him feel seen, made him feel like the victim instead of the man making dangerous choices. One evening, Lillian asked another question. "Why haven't you divorced?" He looked at his cup. "We're practically separated anyway." The words came out so naturally that he almost didn't recognize them. Lillian frowned. "You still live together." "Only because we haven't figured everything out." Another lie. The truth was that he and Judy had never discussed divorce. Not once. But saying the words created distance between his real life and the one he was building in secret. Lillian looked at him with sympathy. "I'm sorry." He nodded. "Thank you." The sympathy felt good, too good, because everyone wants to feel understood. And sometimes, people become attached to the person who listens to their pain. Weeks turned into months. The coffee meetings continued. Phone calls followed. Then text messages. Nothing inappropriate at first. Simple things. "How was your day? Did you finish your project? Hope everything works out." But the messages became more frequent. Then longer. Then more personal. One night, John looked at his phone and realized he had spent nearly an hour talking to Lillian. Meanwhile, Judy was asleep upstairs. A strange feeling settled over him. Guilt. He ignored it. The next morning, he did the same thing again. By now, he had started keeping parts of his life separate. One version of himself existed at home. The husband. The man who shared breakfast with Judy. The man who still kissed her goodbye. The other version existed somewhere else. The lonely man. The misunderstood man. The man whose marriage was supposedly ending. Neither version was completely true, and that was the danger, because living two different lives eventually forces a person to become someone they no longer recognize. One evening, Lillian smiled at him. "You know something?" "What?" "You seem happier lately." The words made him pause. Was he happier, or was he simply escaping parts of his real life? He wasn't sure anymore. She continued smiling. "I'm glad." He smiled back. Then his phone vibrated. A message. From Judy. "Dinner tonight? I miss you." He stared at the screen. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he slowly turned the phone over, face down. And for the first time, John realized he was no longer just hiding conversations. He was hiding himself. Judy wasn't the kind of woman who searched through phones. She didn't read private messages. She didn't question every late arrival, or every change in routine. Trust had always been one of the strongest parts of her marriage. That was why it took her so long to realize something was wrong. Not because she wasn't paying attention, because she never imagined she had a reason to doubt her husband. The first thing she noticed was the silence. John had become quieter. He still smiled, still asked about her day, still thanked her when she made coffee. But something felt different. The easy conversations they used to have seemed harder now. One evening she walked into the kitchen and found him staring out the window. "Dinner's ready." He turned. "Oh, okay." She smiled. "You've been standing there for 10 minutes. "Have I?" She laughed softly. "Where did you go?" He looked confused. "What do you mean?" "You looked like you were somewhere else." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just thinking." She nodded. "About what?" she almost asked. Instead, she let it go. At dinner, she talked about a new project. Normally, John would ask questions, offer ideas, tease her about working too much. Tonight, he simply nodded. "You okay?" He looked up. "Of course." She smiled. "You've said that a lot lately." "I'm fine, Judy." The answer came a little too quickly. She studied him for a second. Then she changed the subject. Later that night, she lay awake in bed. John was beside her, already asleep. At least, she thought he was. A few minutes later, she heard his phone vibrate. He immediately reached for it. The screen lit up. He read something quickly, then turned the phone over. She frowned. It wasn't unusual. People received messages all the time. Still, something about the way he reacted stayed with her. The next morning, she had forgotten about it, until it happened again, and then again. Little things, small moments, easy to dismiss, yet they continued. One evening, she walked into the living room carrying 2 cups of tea. John quickly slipped his phone into his pocket. She stopped. He smiled. "What's wrong?" She handed him a cup. "Nothing." "You looked surprised." "I guess I was." He frowned. "Why?" She smiled lightly. "You've become very protective of your phone." A brief silence followed. Then he laughed. "Have the first?" "A little." "It's probably work." She nodded. Maybe it was. After all, he had started doing more consulting projects. The explanation made sense. So why did she still feel uneasy? Days later, he came home much later than expected. She was sitting on the couch. A movie played quietly in the background. When he walked in, she looked at the clock. "You're late." "I'm sorry." "Everything okay?" "Just got caught up." She smiled. "Long day?" He nodded. Then he headed upstairs. No kiss. No sitting beside her. No asking about her day. She stared after him. The house suddenly felt very empty. Over the next few weeks, it happened more often. Late nights, long phone calls, moments when he seemed distracted. One Saturday morning, she found him sitting on the patio. He looked tired. She carried 2 cups of coffee outside. "Peace offering." He smiled. "I didn't know we were fighting." "We're not." She handed him the cup. "That's the problem." He frowned. She sat down. "We're not fighting." "No, we're not talking." He looked away. The words settled between them. Finally, she said quietly, "I miss us." He swallowed. So do I. Then what happened? He didn't answer, because he didn't know how to answer. How do you explain something you barely understand yourself? She watched him. You've been somewhere else lately. No, I haven't. The answer came too quickly. She noticed. He noticed that she noticed. A heavy silence followed. Then he sighed. I've just had a lot on my mind. She reached for his hand. You can talk to me. He looked at her fingers resting over his. For a moment he wanted to tell her everything. About the confusion, the loneliness, the friendship with Lillian, the lies. But he couldn't. Because once certain truths are spoken aloud, they become impossible to ignore. So instead he said, I'm tired. Her expression softened. Then rest. He smiled weakly. You always make things sound simple. She laughed softly. Maybe because sometimes they are. He looked at her, and for a second, guilt hit him so hard that he could barely breathe, because the woman sitting beside him was still trying, still reaching for him, still choosing him, and he was slowly drifting away. A few nights later, Judy returned home after a long meeting. The house was dark. John wasn't there. She checked the time. Nearly 10 o'clock. That was unusual. She called him. No answer. 20 minutes later, he came through the front door. He looked surprised to see her awake. You're still up. I was waiting. He smiled. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to. She stood. Where were you? Meeting. At this hour? He loosened his tie. It ran late. She nodded slowly. Again the explanation made sense, but lately everything made sense, and still felt wrong. That night, she lay awake for a long time, listening to his breathing, thinking, remembering the road trips, the long conversations, the nights they stayed awake, making plans. Somewhere along the way, they had become strangers living inside the same house. The realization hurt. Not because she stopped loving him, because she hadn't. She loved him just as much as she always had, maybe even more. Because love often grows stronger during difficult seasons. She turned and looked at him sleeping. A thought entered her mind. Maybe they both needed a break. Maybe work had taken too much from them. Maybe they had simply forgotten how to be husband and wife. The next morning, she sat in her office staring at her schedule. Meetings, calls, presentations, dinner with investors. She suddenly closed the calendar. Enough. She picked up her phone and canceled several appointments. Then she smiled. She knew exactly what she wanted to do. She would surprise him, just like they used to surprise each other during the early years of their marriage. They still had the lake house outside Austin, the place where they escaped when life became overwhelming, the place where they laughed, talked, dreamed, the place that had always felt like theirs. She imagined arriving with his favorite pie. They would spend the weekend together. No business, no phones, no interruptions, just the two of them. For the first time in weeks, she felt hopeful. Maybe this was exactly what they needed. A chance to remember each other. A chance to find their way back. That evening she smiled more than she had in days. When John came home, she acted completely normal. She didn't mention her plan. Didn't mention the canceled meetings. Didn't mention the trip. She wanted it to be a surprise. As they sat together at dinner, she looked at him. He seemed tired, distant. Yet she still saw the man she had fallen in love with. And she made a silent promise to herself. This weekend would change things. She would remind him that they were still a team, still partners, still in love. She had no idea that by the end of that weekend, her entire world would look different, because the next morning, she would stop at a small bakery, buy his favorite apple cinnamon pie, and drive toward the lake house believing she was about to save her marriage. Instead, she was driving toward the truth. The next morning, Judy woke up earlier than usual. For the first time in weeks, she felt excited. She made coffee and stood by the kitchen window, watching the sunrise over Dallas. The sky was painted in soft shades of orange and gold. A beautiful morning. A hopeful morning. She smiled to herself. By the end of the weekend, things would be different. She believed that. Maybe she and John simply needed time together. Time away from responsibilities. Time away from phones and meetings and endless schedules. Time to remember why they had fallen in love in the first place. She showered, got dressed, and left the house carrying her purse and car keys. The city was slowly waking up. Traffic wasn't heavy yet. A few minutes later, she pulled into the parking lot of a small bakery. The same bakery she and John had visited many times over the years. As soon as she stepped inside, the familiar smell of cinnamon filled the air. The owner looked up from behind the counter and smiled. "Well, look who finally came back." Judy laughed. "It's been too long." "It certainly has." The older woman walked toward her. "You look busy." "I have been. Too busy, if you ask me." Judy smiled. "You're probably right." The woman folded her arms. "So what can I get for you?" Judy didn't even have to think. "Apple cinnamon pie." The woman grinned. "His favorite." Judy laughed softly. "Yes." The woman disappeared into the kitchen. A few moments later, she returned, carrying a box. She carefully tied a ribbon around it. "There you go." Judy accepted the box. "Thank you." The older woman smiled warmly. "Tell your husband I said hello." A strange feeling touched Judy's heart. The simple words made her smile. "I will." She paid for the pie and walked outside. The box rested carefully on the passenger seat as she drove. She glanced at it more than once. It felt silly, like a small gift from years ago, the kind of thing they used to do for each other. She liked that feeling. The drive toward Austin gave her time to think. Memories came one after another. Their first dates, their road trips, their wedding, the little house they bought together, the nights they stayed awake, planning the future. She smiled at one memory in particular. John standing in the kitchen years earlier, covered in paint while trying to redecorate a room. He had accidentally painted part of his shirt, then his face, then somehow managed to leave paint on the ceiling. She laughed out loud, remembering it. He had looked ridiculous, and they had laughed until tears filled their eyes. The memory made her chest ache, because somewhere along the way, they had stopped laughing like that. She tightened her hands on the steering wheel. No, this weekend would change that. They would talk, reconnect, remember. The farther she drove, the more excited she became. The lake house eventually came into view. It sat quietly among the trees, the same place where they had spent anniversaries, the same place where they escaped whenever life became overwhelming, the same place where they once promised to grow old together. She parked. For a moment she simply sat there. Then she picked up the pie. A smile touched her face. She imagined John's reaction. He would be surprised, probably laugh, maybe even tease her for driving all this way. The thought warmed her heart. She stepped out of the car and walked toward the house. The front door wasn't fully closed. She frowned. That was unusual. John was always careful about locking up. She pushed the door open slightly. Then she heard it. Laughter. A woman's laughter. She stopped. The sound seemed out of place. She stood completely still. Another voice followed. John's. Warm. Relaxed. The kind of laugh she hadn't heard from him in months. Her smile slowly disappeared. For a second she wondered if she had come to the wrong house. Maybe friends were visiting. Maybe there was some explanation. She took another step, then another. The pie box suddenly felt heavy in her hands. She heard the woman's laughter again. Then John's voice, and something inside her chest tightened. The house seemed strangely quiet, except for those voices. She walked farther inside. Her heels made soft sounds against the floor. Every step felt slower than the one before. Then she reached the living room and stopped. The pie slipped from her fingers. The box hit the floor. The lid opened. The pie rolled onto the rug. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. John was sitting on the couch, and beside him sat a woman. Lillian? The woman was wearing Judy's cream-colored robe. For a few seconds, none of them seemed capable of breathing. Lillian looked confused. John looked terrified. Judy simply stared. The room had suddenly become very small, very quiet. John slowly stood. "Judy?" No answer. He took one step forward. "Judy. This isn't what it looks like." The words sounded weak. Even he didn't believe them. Because what else could it possibly look like? Another woman. His wife's robe. Their lake house. The place that held so many memories. Lillian looked from John to Judy, then back again. Confusion slowly gave way to understanding. Her face lost its color. She opened her mouth. No words came out. Judy's eyes moved toward the pie on the floor, a strange thing to notice, but in moments of shock, the mind often clings to small details. The ribbon had come undone. The box was crushed. She had driven all that way, bought his favorite dessert, planned an entire weekend to save her marriage. And now, nothing made sense. John took another step. "Please, let me explain." Still, she said nothing. He looked desperate. "Judy, say something." Her eyes lifted to his. For years she had looked into those eyes and found comfort, trust, love. Now she found something else, fear and guilt. The silence stretched. 1 second, then another, then another. Lillian slowly stood. She looked as though she wanted to disappear. John's voice shook. "Please." Judy didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't ask questions, didn't demand answers. Instead, she bent down, picked up her car keys, straightened her jacket, and looked at both of them one final time. Then she turned around and walked away. The sound of her heels echoed through the house. John remained frozen. He looked as though he wanted to run after her, yet he couldn't move. The front door opened, then closed. Silence. The kind of silence that changes lives. Lillian looked at him. "Your wife." He couldn't answer, because for the first time in a very long time, he was afraid. Not of losing money, not of losing his reputation, not of being judged. He was afraid of losing the woman who had stood beside him when he had nothing. Outside, Judy reached her car. She opened the door, then stopped. Her hands were trembling. She slowly sat down, closed the door, and stared through the windshield. The lake shimmered under the afternoon sun. Birds flew across the water. The world looked exactly the same, yet everything had changed. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away. Then another followed. She closed her eyes. A memory appeared. John laughing during one of their first road trips. Another memory. Their wedding day. Another. The promises they made. Promises that now felt painfully far away. She opened her eyes again. For several long moments she simply sat there. Then she started the engine and drove away. Behind her, inside the lake house, two people remained standing in complete silence. Neither of them realized it yet, but the quiet woman who had just walked out of that house was about to teach them both a lesson they would never forget. The drive back to Dallas felt endless. Judy didn't turn on the radio, didn't answer her phone, didn't cry again. She simply drove, both hands on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the road ahead. The sun slowly disappeared behind her. Darkness settled over the highway. Still she kept driving. Her mind replayed the same image over and over. John, the couch, the robe, Lillian. Every memory felt unreal, as though she had stepped into someone else's life. By the time she reached home, it was late. She parked in the driveway and sat there for a long time. The house looked exactly the same. The porch lights were on. Flowers lined the walkway. Everything appeared normal, yet nothing was. Eventually, she stepped out of the car and walked inside. The silence greeted her. She placed her purse on the table, then slowly removed her wedding ring. She stared at it for several seconds. Years of memories rested inside that tiny circle of gold. Promises, dreams, sacrifices, love. She placed it carefully on the kitchen counter. Then she went upstairs. For the first time in years, she slept alone. Back at the lake house, John was still standing in the living room. The front door had closed several minutes earlier, yet he hadn't moved. Lillian looked at him. "John." No answer. She took a step toward him. "Say something." He finally looked at her. His face had gone pale. "I need to go." "To your wife?" He didn't answer. Because there was no answer. He grabbed his keys, then stopped. What would he even say? How could he explain any of this? He looked toward the door, then at the crushed pie still lying on the floor. The sight made his stomach tighten. She had come to surprise him. He knew that now. She had brought his favorite pie, and he had destroyed everything. Lillian's voice came quietly. "You told me your marriage was over." He closed his eyes. Not now. He couldn't answer that question now. He walked out of the house. The drive home felt like a nightmare. Several times he reached for his phone. Several times he put it back down. By the time he reached the house, every light was off. He opened the front door slowly. "Judy?" No answer. He walked farther inside. "Judy?" Still nothing. Then he saw it. Her wedding ring. Resting on the kitchen counter. His heart dropped. He picked it up. For the first time that day, his hands began shaking. "Judy?" The house remained silent. He checked the bedroom. Empty. The guest room. Empty. The patio. Empty. She wasn't there. That night he barely slept. The next morning he called her. No answer. He called again. And again. Nothing. He sent messages. "Please talk to me. I'm sorry. Can we meet? I made a mistake." Still nothing. A day passed. Then another. Then another. The silence became unbearable. By the fourth day he looked exhausted. He couldn't eat. Couldn't focus. Every room in the house reminded him of her. Her coffee mug. Her books. Her favorite blanket. The absence of another person can make a house feel enormous. And lonely. Very lonely. Then, 1 week after the lake house, everything changed. He received an email. Then another. Then another. At first, he thought there had been a mistake. One account had been closed. Another had been transferred. An executive membership had been canceled. A vehicle had been removed from company benefits. He frowned. None of this made sense. He called the financial advisor. "There has to be some confusion." "I'm afraid there isn't." "What do you mean?" "The assets belong to your wife." He went quiet. The advisor continued. "You had access to many of them, but ownership remained under her trusts and companies." He sat down slowly. "That's impossible." "It isn't." The call ended. Another email arrived. Then another. The comfortable life he had been living suddenly looked different. Very different. Because piece by piece, he realized something painful. Much of what he enjoyed existed because Judy had built it. She had never reminded him. Never used it against him. Never made him feel small. She simply shared everything with him. And now, she had stopped sharing. He opened drawers, looked through documents, read papers he had ignored for years. The truth was, sitting right there, he just had never paid attention. For a long time, he sat alone at the kitchen table. Then he looked at the empty chair across from him. A memory appeared. Judy laughing over breakfast. Another memory. Her staying up late to help him review documents after his business collapsed. Another. Her holding his hand and telling him they would be okay. He lowered his head. What had he done? Days passed. People started calling. Friends. Business contacts. He ignored everyone. Meanwhile, something else happened. Judy said nothing. No social media posts. No public accusations. No dramatic scenes. No interviews. Nothing. She simply disappeared from public view. That frightened him even more. Because he knew her. If she was quiet, she was thinking. One evening he sat alone in the living room when his phone vibrated. For a moment, hope filled his chest. But it wasn't Judy. He placed the phone back down, then looked around the empty room. He had spent years worrying that he wasn't enough. Now he understood something. He had been enough for her. She had chosen him again and again, even during his worst moments. And he had thrown that love away. Meanwhile, in another part of Dallas, Judy sat inside her office. The lights were low. Several documents rested on the desk. She looked tired, but calm. very calm. One of her employees had called earlier. Another had sent messages. She ignored them all. She wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. Instead, she stared at a photograph. She and John, smiling, happy. She gently placed it face down. Then she picked up her phone. There was one question she couldn't stop asking herself. Who was Lillian? A woman who knew exactly what she was doing? Or someone who had been lied to? She needed answers. Not for revenge. For clarity. She reached for another phone number. Made the call. When someone answered, her voice remained steady. I need information on someone. A brief pause. Then, she continued. Her name is Lillian. She ended the call and placed the phone on her desk. Outside the office window, the city lights shimmered. Judy leaned back in her chair. For the first time since the lake house, she had made a decision. And before this was over, the truth about Lillian would change everything. 3 days after making the call, Judy returned to her office. The city outside was waking up. Cars filled the streets below. People hurried toward work. Everything looked normal. Her life did not. She placed her purse on the desk and tried to focus on emails. It didn't work. Her attention kept drifting. Back to the lake house. Back to that moment. Back to the woman wearing her robe. A knock interrupted her thoughts. She looked up. A large envelope had been delivered. No return address. No note. Just her name. For several seconds, she stared at it. Then, she slowly opened it. Inside were documents, photographs, a report, the information she had requested. She took a deep breath and began reading. The first page contained basic information. Lillian, age, employment history, addresses, nothing unusual. She turned the page, then another, and another. Very slowly, the picture began to change. Lillian had spent most of her childhood in foster care. Judy stopped reading. She looked at the page again, then continued. One placement, after another. Temporary homes, frequent moves, different schools, different cities. No stability, no permanent family. The details were heartbreaking. She leaned back in her chair. A strange sadness settled over her. She had grown up surrounded by people who loved her. A grandmother who believed in her. Neighbors who looked after one another. Sunday dinners, cookouts, laughter. Even during difficult times, she had never doubted that she belonged somewhere. Lillian hadn't had that. The report continued. As an adult, she had worked hard. Several jobs, long hours, career courses, no criminal record, no history of taking advantage of people, no secret life, nothing. Judy frowned. This wasn't what she had expected. She kept reading. The investigator had included interviews with people who knew Lillian. A former co-worker described her as kind. Another called her dependable. Someone else said she often put other people before herself. Judy slowly lowered the papers. This didn't sound like a woman chasing money. She picked up another page. There were notes from recent months. That was where things became clearer. Lillian had spoken to several friends about someone she was dating. Someone she believed was financially secure. Someone she believed was almost divorced. Someone who had promised that a new life was possible. Judy's fingers tightened around the paper. Her eyes moved slowly across the page. Then she stopped. The investigator had included a summary. No evidence suggests Lillian knew the marriage remained intact. No evidence suggests she knew the extent of Judy's involvement in her husband's financial stability. No evidence suggests intentional deception on her part. For a long time, Judy didn't move. She simply stared at the words. Then, she closed the file. A knock sounded at her office door. She quickly wiped her face. She hadn't even realized tears had gathered in her eyes. Come in. Someone stepped inside. You have a meeting in 20 minutes. She nodded. Thank you. The door closed again, but she didn't move. She looked at the envelope, then back at the report. A memory suddenly came to her. Lillian's expression at the lake house. The confusion. The shock. The way she had looked at John. At the time, Judy had been too hurt to think about it. Now she remembered something important. Lillian had looked surprised, as if she hadn't expected a wife to walk through that door, as if she had believed something entirely different. Judy slowly closed her eyes. Another memory followed. John saying, "This isn't what it looks like." No, it had been exactly what it looked like. The lies had simply started much earlier than she realized. She stood and walked toward the window. Far below, people crossed the street carrying coffee and briefcases. Ordinary lives, ordinary problems. She wondered how many of them were carrying hidden pain. How many were living inside stories no one else could see? A soft sigh escaped her. She thought about Lillian again. A little girl growing up without a permanent home. A young woman searching for stability. Someone hoping to finally build a life with another person. Someone who had trusted the wrong man. Suddenly something became painfully clear. Lillian hadn't stolen her husband. John had offered a version of himself that didn't exist. He had created a story. A lonely husband. An unhappy marriage. An almost divorced man. And Lillian had believed him because she wanted to believe in something. In someone. Judy sat back down. The anger she had been carrying shifted slightly. Not toward John. That anger remained. But toward Lillian? No. Something else had taken its place. Understanding. A quiet kind of understanding. One born from seeing another person's pain. She picked up the report again. Near the end was a small detail. The investigator had noted that Lillian had recently applied for educational programs that could improve her career opportunities. Judy stared at the information. Even now, even after everything, Lillian was trying to build a better future. That detail touched something deep inside her. Because Judy understood hard work. She understood trying to create a different life. She understood carrying hope. Very slowly, she closed the file. Then she whispered something to herself. She didn't know. The words hung in the room. She said them again. She didn't know. A few tears escaped. Not because she was no longer hurt. She was very hurt. But pain and compassion can exist at the same time. The human heart is complicated that way. Her phone vibrated. The screen lit up. John. She stared at it. He had called many times over the past week. She had ignored every message. The phone continued vibrating, then stopped. A moment later, another message appeared. "Please, talk to me." She placed the phone down. Not yet. There were still things she needed to understand. She looked at the file one more time. Then another thought entered her mind. What if Lillian was sitting somewhere right now, believing that she had destroyed a marriage? What if she had no idea that she had been lied to from the very beginning? The thought stayed with her long after she left the office, long after she arrived home, long after the sun disappeared. That night, she sat alone in the living room. A cup of tea rested on the table. The house was quiet. She looked around. So many memories lived inside these walls. Good memories, painful memories. She thought about revenge, about exposing everything publicly, about making John feel the same humiliation she felt. The thoughts came, then slowly faded, because none of those things would give her peace, and none of those things would change what had happened. A sentence from her grandmother suddenly came back to her. Money can disappear overnight, but character stays forever. Judy closed her eyes. Character. Who did she want to be after this? An angry woman? A bitter woman? A cruel woman? No. Pain had entered her life, but she refused to let it change who she was. She opened her eyes. Then she looked at the report again. At the name on the first page. Lillian. For the first time, she didn't see a rival. She saw another woman who had been standing inside a lie. And in that moment, Judy made a decision. She would not seek revenge. She would seek the truth. And perhaps, if the opportunity came, she would give another woman something she herself had once received from her grandmother. Compassion. Because sometimes the strongest people are not the ones who fight the hardest. Sometimes they are the ones who choose kindness when they have every reason not to. The next morning, Judy woke with a strange sense of calm. Not happiness, not relief, just calm. For the first time since the lake house, she knew what she needed to do. The report still rested on her dining table. She looked at it for several seconds, then picked it up. She carefully placed several documents into a folder. Bank records, property documents, company ownership papers, a few financial statements. Nothing exaggerated. Nothing intended to humiliate anyone. Just facts. Simple, undeniable facts. She closed the folder and reached for her phone. For a long moment she stared at the screen. Then she sent a message. I think we should talk. Just the two of us. Several minutes passed. No reply. Then the phone vibrated. Lillian had answered. Why? The question was short, almost cautious. Judy looked at the screen. Then she typed. Because there are things you deserve to know. Another long pause followed. Finally, another message appeared. Where? Judy named a small coffee shop in Dallas. The same kind of place where people came to work quietly, or spend an hour reading. Nothing formal, nothing intimidating. A neutral place, a safe place. The meeting was set for that afternoon. As the time approached, Judy drove there slowly. She wasn't nervous. At least, not in the way she expected. She simply wondered how this conversation would end. She arrived first. The cafe smelled of coffee and baked bread. Soft music played in the background. A few customers sat by the windows. Everything seemed ordinary. Yet she knew this conversation would change two lives. She chose a table in the corner, placed the folder beside her, and waited. Several minutes later, the door opened. Lillian stepped inside. She looked uncertain, almost uncomfortable. Her eyes found Judy immediately. For a moment, neither woman moved. Then Judy stood. Thank you for coming. Lillian looked surprised by the gentle greeting. She slowly sat down. I wasn't sure I should. I understand. Silence settled between them. A server approached. Judy ordered coffee, then looked at Lillian. What would you like? Lillian blinked. You're buying me coffee? If that's okay. For the first time, confusion crossed Lillian's face. Yes. A few minutes later, the drinks arrived. Neither woman touched them. Lillian finally spoke. I thought you hated me. Judy looked at her. I don't know you well enough to hate you. The answer seemed to surprise her. She looked down at the table, then quietly asked, Why am I here? Judy took a slow breath, then opened the folder. She placed several papers on the table. I need you to see something. Lillian frowned. What is this? Please read it. Very slowly, she picked up the first page. At first, she didn't understand what she was looking at. Then her eyes narrowed. She turned another page, then another. The room became very quiet. A few minutes passed. Finally, she looked up. I don't understand. Judy's voice remained calm. The lake house. Lillian swallowed. I know. You seemed surprised when I walked in. She lowered her eyes. I was. Why? Silence. Then, almost in a whisper, she said, Because John told me your marriage was over. Judy nodded slowly. He said we were living separate lives. Another nod. He said you barely spoke. Lillian looked down at the papers again. He said divorce was only a matter of time. Her voice shook slightly. He said he had stayed because things were complicated. The words hung in the air. Then Judy gently pushed another document toward her. Read this. Lillian picked it up. Her hands were beginning to tremble. The paper contained property records, company information, ownership documents. She frowned, then looked at Judy. I don't understand. Keep reading. She did. Several long moments passed. Then her expression changed. Confusion, then disbelief, then something else. She looked at Judy again. He said? Her voice broke. He said he owned all of this. Judy said nothing. Lillian looked back at the papers. The truth was right there. The properties, the businesses, the investments, everything. Not John's, Judy's. No. The word came out as a whisper. She picked up another page. Bank statements, financial records, more evidence, more truth. The color slowly drained from her face. He said he was wealthy. Judy remained silent. He said he had built everything himself. Another page. Another lie. He said, her voice cracked, he said we would have a future. The cafe suddenly felt very small, very quiet. Lillian looked from one paper to another, then back again, as if the truth might somehow change. It didn't. A tear rolled down her cheek, then another. No. She shook her head. No. Judy watched quietly. She had imagined this moment many times. Anger, arguments, accusations. Instead, she was watching another person's world fall apart. Lillian covered her mouth with her hand. He lied to me. The words came out broken. Nobody answered, because there was nothing to say. She looked at Judy. Her eyes were full of tears. I didn't know. I know. That answer made her cry harder. You believe me? Yes. Why? Judy took a slow breath. Because I saw your face at the lake house. Lillian stared at her. You looked shocked. A tear slipped down her cheek. You looked hurt. More tears. You looked like someone who had just learned the truth. Lillian lowered her head. Her shoulders began shaking. I didn't know. Judy gently slid a napkin across the table. Lillian looked at it, then at her. You should hate me. Judy's voice softened. I spent days thinking I did. Silence. Then she added, but I don't. The tears came even harder. I feel so stupid. You're not. I believed everything. She looked down at the papers. Everything. For several moments, neither woman spoke. Then Lillian whispered, I thought he loved me. The pain in her voice filled the space between them. Judy looked at her carefully. This wasn't a woman celebrating someone else's pain. This wasn't a woman who had won anything. This was another person sitting inside heartbreak. Another person trying to understand what had happened. Very softly, Judy asked, Did he know about your childhood? Lillian nodded. He knew I grew up in foster care. He knew you wanted a family? Another nod. A fresh wave of tears appeared. He knew I wanted stability. The answer hurt, because it meant John had known exactly what she needed to hear. And he had given her a beautiful story, one that wasn't real. Lillian finally looked up. Why are you being kind to me? Judy thought about the question, then answered honestly, because somebody lied to both of us. Silence. The words seemed to settle deep inside Lillian. More tears fell. I never wanted to hurt you. I know. I'm so sorry. Judy nodded gently. I know. For the first time since the lake house, a strange feeling filled the space between them. Not friendship. Not yet. Something quieter. Understanding. Two women, sitting across from each other, both carrying pain, both realizing they had been standing inside the same lie. Lillian looked down at the documents one last time. Then she covered her face with both hands. And finally, she broke. The sobs came without warning. Deep. Painful. The kind that come when a person realizes an entire future has disappeared. Judy didn't move, didn't interrupt. She simply sat there and waited, because sometimes the greatest kindness you can offer another person is allowing them the space to grieve the truth. The cafe had become very quiet. Lillian sat with her face in her hands. Her shoulders trembled. Tears continued falling. The documents remained spread across the table like pieces of a life that no longer existed. Judy didn't rush her. She didn't interrupt. She simply waited. After several minutes, Lillian slowly lowered her hands. Her eyes were red. I feel so embarrassed. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Judy handed her another napkin. You don't need to be. Lillian gave a small, painful laugh. I believed everything. She looked down at the papers again. Every single thing. Judy remained silent, because there was no point pretending the truth wasn't painful. Lillian wiped her face. I thought he understood me. She looked toward the window. I thought I had finally found someone who wanted the same things I wanted. Her voice trembled again. A home. She swallowed hard. A family. Judy listened quietly. I thought my life was finally changing. The words broke apart at the end. Another tear rolled down her cheek. For the first time since sitting down, Judy felt something she never expected. Not anger, not resentment. Sorrow? Deep sorrow. Because she understood hope. She understood building dreams. And now she was watching another person's dream collapse. Lillian looked at her. How are you being so calm? The question hung between them. Judy looked down at her coffee, then back at her. I'm not calm. Lillian frowned. You seem calm. Judy gave a small smile. I cried. Silence. I cried in my car. She looked at the table. I cried at home. A soft breath escaped her. I cried because I loved my husband. The honesty in her voice made Lillian's eyes fill again. Judy continued. I cried because I thought I knew my life. She folded her hands. And then I realized I didn't. Neither woman spoke. Finally, Lillian whispered, I'm sorry. Judy nodded gently. I know. I never wanted this. I know. You keep saying that because I believe you. The answers seemed to confuse her. Lillian stared at her for several seconds, then asked quietly, Why? Judy thought about the question, then answered honestly, Because I know what it feels like to trust someone. A long silence followed. Lillian looked down. I trusted him. So did I. The two women looked at each other, and for the first time, they truly saw one another. Not as rivals, not as enemies, just two people carrying the same pain from different directions. Lillian's voice shook. Do you hate him? The question surprised Judy. She thought about it. A long time. Then she slowly shook her head. No, you don't? She sighed softly. I'm hurt. A pause. I'm disappointed. Another pause. And I don't know if I will ever understand why he made these choices. She looked down at her hands. But hate is heavy. She lifted her eyes again. I don't want to carry it. Silence settled between them. Lillian seemed to be thinking about those words. Finally, she whispered, I don't want to hate him either. She looked embarrassed by her own answer. I know I should be angry. Judy smiled sadly. Feelings don't follow rules. That made Lillian laugh softly through her tears. The first small laugh since she had arrived. The moment felt strangely human. Two women sitting in heartbreak, still managing to understand each other. After a while, Lillian asked another question. How long were you married? Judy smiled faintly. A long time. Were you happy? The question brought another memory. Long drives, late-night conversations, a little house with a creaky porch, laughter, plans, dreams. She smiled. Yes. Then her smile softened. We were. Lillian lowered her eyes. I'm sorry I became part of this. Judy reached across the table and gently placed her hand over hers. The gesture surprised both of them. Then Judy said the words that had slowly formed inside her heart over the past few days. Never let a man's broken character turn two women into enemies. Lillian looked up. A tear slid down her cheek. Judy continued. You and I didn't make promises to each other. Silence. We didn't betray each other. Another pause. We were both given different versions of the same story. Lillian stared at her. The words seemed to settle somewhere deep inside. Judy squeezed her hand gently. If we walk away from this hating each other, then his choices hurt even more people. Neither of them spoke. Then another tear escaped Lillian. My whole life, she whispered, I've wanted somewhere to belong. The honesty in her voice was heartbreaking. She looked away. I thought I finally found it. Judy's heart ached because she suddenly understood something. Lillian wasn't grieving a man. She was grieving the future she believed existed. Very softly, Judy asked, What do you want now? The question seemed to surprise her. She thought for a long moment. then gave a small shrug. I don't know. You mentioned wanting to improve your career. Lillian nodded. I applied for some courses. You should still do it. She looked up. Really? Yes. But everything feels different now. Judy smiled gently. That doesn't mean your dreams disappeared. Silence. You still deserve a future. More tears appeared. No one had said something like that to her in a long time. Perhaps no one ever had. Lillian looked down, then laughed softly through her tears. You know what's strange? What? I was terrified to meet you. Judy smiled. I figured. I thought you were going to yell at me. That made Judy laugh softly. I considered it. Lillian laughed too. The sound was brief, but real. For the first time, the heavy atmosphere eased slightly. Neither woman noticed that they were no longer sitting like strangers. The conversation continued. They talked for another hour. About work, about dreams, about disappointment, about starting over. And when they finally stood to leave, neither of them seemed eager to walk away. Outside the cafe, the afternoon sun warmed the sidewalk. Lillian looked at Judy. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to. I think I do. Judy smiled. Then promise me something. What? Don't let this convince you that you're unworthy of love. Lillian's eyes filled again. And don't let someone else's choices decide your value. She nodded slowly. I'll try. A small silence followed. Then Lillian said something unexpected. I hope, someday, you heal from this too. Judy blinked, then smiled. Thank you. They stood there for another moment. Then Lillian took a step back. I should go. Okay. She hesitated, then smiled softly. I'm glad you called me. The words surprised Judy, because somehow she was glad too. Lillian turned and walked away. Judy watched her disappear down the sidewalk. Then she looked toward the sky. Life was strange. A week ago, she thought this woman had ruined her marriage. Today, she had shared coffee and tears with her. As she walked toward her car, one thought stayed with her. Perhaps healing doesn't always arrive the way we expect. Sometimes, it begins with understanding the pain of someone else. And sometimes, an unexpected friendship starts in the middle of heartbreak. The days following the coffee shop meeting felt different. Not easier, just different. For the first time in weeks, Judy no longer carried questions about Lillian. The truth had replaced assumptions. And somehow, that made the pain feel lighter. One evening, she sat alone in her living room thinking about their conversation. She remembered the look on Lillian's face when she learned the truth. The disbelief, the embarrassment, the grief. Then she remembered something else. The applications for career courses. The hope that still existed underneath all the hurt. Judy smiled softly. A person willing to keep building a future after so many disappointments deserved encouragement. Without thinking too much about it, she picked up her phone. She sent a short message. I hope you're doing okay. Several minutes later, her phone vibrated. I'm trying. The answer made her smile. She typed another message. That's enough for today. The reply came almost immediately. Thank you. A few days later, they met again. This time there were no documents on the table. No tears. No difficult truths waiting to be revealed. Just 2 cups of coffee. And conversation. Lillian looked tired, but calmer. Have you thought about the courses? Judy asked. Lillian nodded. I have. And? She smiled nervously. I think I'm going to do it. Judy smiled. I think that's a good idea. Lillian looked down at her cup. I'm scared. Of what? Starting over. Judy laughed softly. I've started over a few times myself. You make it look easy. It isn't. Lillian looked up. Then how do you do it? Judy thought for a moment. One small step at a time. Silence. Then she added, You don't have to know exactly where you're going. You just have to keep moving. Lillian smiled. You always sound like you have life figured out. That made Judy laugh. I definitely don't. They both smiled. For the first time, the conversation felt comfortable, natural. Not because their pain had disappeared, because they were beginning to trust each other. Weeks passed. Lillian enrolled in several courses. At first she seemed uncertain. She questioned herself constantly, wondered if she was too late, wondered if she was capable. Every time doubt appeared, Judy encouraged her. One afternoon, Lillian called. "I think I failed an assignment." "What happened?" "I don't understand half of what they're teaching." Judy smiled. "You've been in class for 3 weeks." "I know. Give yourself time." Lillian sighed. "What if I'm not good enough?" Judy became quiet. Then she said softly, "I think you've spent too much of your life underestimating yourself." Silence. "You survived things that would have broken other people." Another pause. "You're stronger than you think." The line became quiet. Then Lillian laughed softly. "You always know what to say." "No." Judy smiled. "I just know what it's like to need encouragement." Months passed. Slowly, little by little, something changed. Lillian smiled more, talked more, began carrying herself differently. One afternoon she arrived at a cafe carrying books and notebooks. She sat down and grinned. "What happened?" Judy asked. "I got the highest score in my class." Judy laughed. "Look at you." Lillian smiled proudly. "I almost cried." "You should be proud." "I am." The joy in her voice made Judy smile. For the first time in a long while, she saw confidence returning. Not because a man had chosen her, because she was choosing herself. Meanwhile, John was struggling very badly. The silence in his house had become unbearable. Every room reminded him of Judy. Every memory seemed to follow him. Her coffee cup still sat in the cabinet. Her books remained on the shelf. A sweater still hung in the closet. The little things hurt the most. One evening he stood in the kitchen staring at her favorite mug. He remembered buying it years ago. She had laughed because the color didn't match anything in the house. Yet she used it almost every day. A soft laugh escaped him. Then the laughter disappeared. Because she wasn't there anymore. He sat down. The house felt too quiet, too large, too empty. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Lillian. For several seconds, he simply stared at the name. Then he answered. "Hello?" Silence. Then her voice came. "I don't think we should talk anymore." He closed his eyes. "Lillian." "No." Her voice was calm. "I know everything." He didn't answer. Because there was nothing left to say. "You lied to me." He swallowed. "I know. You lied about your marriage." Silence. "You lied about your life." Another silence. Finally, she said something that hurt more than he expected. "I trusted you." He lowered his head. "I know. I don't hate you." The words surprised him. "But I can't do this." A long pause followed. Then she said softly, "I hope you figure out why you did it." The call ended. He remained sitting there, phone in hand, completely alone. And for the first time, the full weight of his choices settled on his shoulders. He had lost Lillian, and he had already lost Judy. The loneliness that followed was different. This time, there were no excuses, no stories, no distractions, just truth. He had destroyed 2 relationships, and he had done it with his own decisions. Days later, he drove past one of Judy's projects. Workers moved around the property. A large sign displayed her company's name. He stopped the car and simply looked at it. A memory surfaced. Years ago, she had sat at their kitchen table drawing dream houses, talking about building places where families could make memories. He remembered every detail, because he had once believed in those dreams as much as she did. He closed his eyes. What had happened to him? When had he become a man capable of hurting the person who loved him most? The answer didn't come, because some questions take a long time to answer. A week later, he made a decision. He couldn't continue living in silence. He needed to talk to Judy, not to ask for another chance, not to make excuses, just to say the words he should have said long ago. "I'm sorry." He stood outside her office building for nearly 20 minutes, then finally walked inside. His heart pounded. When he reached the reception area, he stopped. For a moment he almost turned around. Then he took a breath. "I'd like to see Judy." A few minutes later he was told to wait. He sat down, hands clasped together, nervous, more nervous than he had been in years. Because for the first time, he wasn't worried about losing money, or status, or comfort. He was about to face the woman who had loved him when he had nothing. The woman he had disappointed. The woman he had broken. And he had no idea if she would even agree to see him. But one thing had finally become clear. He would carry the consequences of his choices for a very long time. And perhaps, the hardest lesson of all, was realizing what something is worth only after you've lost it. Several months passed. Life slowly settled into a different rhythm. Not the one any of them had imagined. But life rarely asks for permission before changing direction. Spring arrived in Texas. The trees were green again. The days felt warmer. And for the first time in a long while, Judy woke up one morning, feeling something she hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not complete peace. Some wounds still ached. Some memories still hurt. But the heaviness she had carried since the lake house was no longer controlling her life. She had returned to work. Returned to designing homes. Returned to laughing occasionally. And most importantly, she had returned to herself. One afternoon she sat in her office reviewing plans when an idea came to her. She looked toward the large windows, then reached for her notebook. For years she had supported several charitable organizations quietly. Now she wanted to do something more personal, something meaningful. Her thoughts drifted to Lillian, to the report she had read, to the little girl who had moved from one foster home to another, to the young woman who had spent most of her life searching for stability. By the time she closed the notebook, she knew exactly what she wanted to do. She would host a charity event. The purpose would be simple: support young women leaving foster care, provide educational opportunities, career resources, mentorship, a chance to believe in their futures. The idea immediately filled her with excitement. For the next several weeks, she threw herself into planning. There were meetings, phone calls, preparations. And throughout it all, one person remained by her side: Lillian. One evening the two women sat together reviewing notes. Judy smiled. "I still can't believe how much you've helped." Lillian laughed softly. "I think you've forgotten something." "What?" "You practically pushed me back into life." Judy smiled. "I didn't push." "You definitely pushed." They both laughed. The sound felt easy now. Natural. Neither woman could have imagined this months earlier. Yet here they were. Not because pain had disappeared. Because they had chosen not to let it turn them against each other. Lillian closed her notebook. "I've been thinking." "That can be dangerous." She laughed. "I'm serious." "Okay." She became quiet. Then asked, "Would it be strange if I spoke at the event?" Judy blinked. "You want to?" Lillian nodded. "I think maybe my story could help someone." For several seconds Judy simply looked at her. Then she smiled. "I think that's a wonderful idea." A nervous smile appeared on Lillian's face. "You really think so?" "I do." Lillian looked down. "I never thought I'd be the kind of person who stands in front of a room and speaks." Judy reached across the table. "You'd be surprised what people are capable of after they heal." The words stayed with her. Weeks later, the evening of the event finally arrived. The ballroom looked beautiful. Soft lights filled the room. Tables were decorated simply but elegantly. Guests slowly began arriving. Business leaders, community members, supporters, young women from foster care programs. The atmosphere felt warm, hopeful. Backstage, Lillian adjusted her dress for the third time. Her hands were shaking. Judy laughed softly. "You're going to wrinkle the fabric." "I can't do this." "Yes, you can." "What if I forget everything?" "You won't." "What if I trip?" Judy smiled. "Then stand back up." That made Lillian laugh. Then she suddenly became quiet. You really believe in me? The words were soft, almost surprised. Judy looked at her. Of course I do. A few moments later, someone announced that the event was beginning. Guests took their seats. Music faded. Judy stepped onto the stage first. Applause filled the room. She smiled warmly, then looked around. So many people in this room know what it means to start over. The room became quiet. Some of us have rebuilt businesses. She smiled gently. Some have rebuilt dreams. A brief pause. And some have rebuilt themselves. She spoke about opportunity, about hope, about believing in people who need support. Then she introduced the evening's guest speaker, Lillian. The applause that followed seemed to surprise her. She took a deep breath, then walked onto the stage. For a second, she looked nervous. Then she found Judy's encouraging smile, and something inside her settled. She stepped toward the microphone. When I was a little girl, she began, I used to wonder what it felt like to belong somewhere. The room became very still. She spoke about foster care, about moving from place to place, about loneliness, about searching for stability. Not once did she mention John. Not once did she mention betrayal. Because this evening wasn't about pain. It was about growth. She spoke about education, about courage, about learning to believe in herself. Then she said something that made several people wipe away tears. Sometimes the people who help change your life are the ones you never expected to meet. Her eyes moved toward Judy. The room followed her gaze. A soft smile appeared on Judy's face. The applause when Lillian finished was long and heartfelt. She stepped away from the microphone, looking emotional. Backstage, she laughed and cried at the same time. I actually did it. Judy laughed. You definitely did. Then they hugged. A simple hug. One built on understanding and healing. Across the room, another pair of eyes watched quietly. John. He had arrived late and taken a seat near the back. He hadn't planned on coming. But when he heard about the event, he couldn't stay away. Now he sat there watching the two women, the two people he had hurt. And for the first time, he saw them clearly. Not as people who had abandoned him, not as people who had chosen each other over him. He saw something else. Strength, grace, kindness. They had every reason to hate one another. Instead, they had helped each other heal. The realization humbled him. He remained seated as guests began leaving. Eventually, Judy noticed him. Their eyes met. For a long moment, neither moved. Then she walked over. He stood immediately. You came, he nodded. I hope that's okay. It is. Silence followed. He looked nervous, more nervous than she had ever seen him. Finally, he said, The event was beautiful. Thank you. He looked toward the stage. She's doing well. A small smile appeared on Judy's face. She is. Another silence. Then he looked back at her. I've wanted to say something for a long time. She waited. He swallowed. I'm sorry. The words were simple, but genuine. I am so sorry. He looked down. I hurt you. A pause. I hurt someone else too. Another pause. And I spent a long time blaming everything except myself. He looked at her again. I see that now. The room seemed very quiet. Judy studied him. He looked different, older somehow. Not in years, in understanding. Finally, she spoke. I hope you find peace, John. The answer surprised him. No anger, no bitterness, just sincerity. His eyes became glossy. You deserved better from me. She nodded softly. Then she said something he would remember for the rest of his life. We both deserved honesty. A tear slipped down his cheek. He nodded. You're right. A long silence followed. Then Judy smiled gently. Take care of yourself. He looked at her. You too. And that was it. No dramatic ending. No final argument. Just two people saying goodbye to the life they once shared. As Judy walked away, John remained standing alone, watching, thinking, understanding. Sometimes love ends quietly. Not because it wasn't real, but because people change. People make choices, and choices have consequences. A person's value should never depend on who chooses them, leaves them, or lies to them. Real wealth is self-respect. Real love never requires you to lose yourself. And sometimes, the greatest victory is walking away with your kindness still intact. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and share it with someone who may need this message today. And if you enjoy unforgettable stories filled with love, heartbreak, and powerful life lessons, don't forget to subscribe to Mr. George Stories. Until next time, take care of your heart and never forget your worth.